Welcome to our presentation about conflict as part of our development economics class. First, let me introduce the key purpose of our project, which is to understand the main implication of conflict on economic development. In light of the definition from the Verwimp, Justino, and Brugg paper, violent conflicts refer to the systematic breakdown of the social norms, which involves mass violence instigated through collective action. It includes violent protests, riots, civil wars, international wars, and terrorism, but it doesn't include forms of social conflict that do not result in mass violence, such as strikes, robberies, and domestic violence. While being general on the concepts, the paper Microeconomics of Violent Conflict presents a new empirical field of development economics, which consists of collecting and analyzing data, mainly from household surveys, to better understand how people live and make decisions in conflict settings. It focuses on first how individuals behave, second how people contribute to conflicts, and third the use of randomized control trials to assess the impact of policy interventions on people living during or after civil wars. To study the microeconomics of conflicts, some misconceptions had to be left out. It is possible today to access and study war zones using innovative data collection methods and mobile phone technologies. Moreover, the belief that acts of violence were irrational had to be revised. Conflicts are in fact rational by providing a comparative advantage and might be optimal in some cases. During wartime, households try to maximize their utility and face a trade off between welfare and physical security. This, for example, impacts the decisions of parents to send or not their kids to school for their safety. Overall, this is a novel approach, and including this knowledge in the decision making process is crucial to policy making. War, therefore, has long term consequences on economic agents who need to adapt, and new equilibrium is kept even when the conflict ends. For example, we observe that the post war attendance to school remains low.
The Corruption Index 2019 shows that corruption is widely spread across the globe, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, which has the lowest score in the CPI. Sub-Saharan countries also face extreme poverty, which is defined as the difficulty to meet or satisfy basic needs, such as food and education beyond primary school level. Therefore, in 2009, Ikejaku studied the relationship between poverty, conflict, and development. To explain why some countries are even poorer today than they were 30 years ago, the author examines several factors such as economic, political, population growth, and so forth, and claims that even if there is no unilaterally explanation, political corruption stands out as the most persuasive, compelling, and primary explanation. His analysis is based on the humanist theory, which states that conflict and instability arise because people are denied not only their biological needs, but also psychological needs that relate to growth and development. Therefore, basic needs cannot be traded, suppressed, or bargained, otherwise it will lead to conflict. While this paper recognizes that there are both exogenous and endogenous trends that influence political corruption, the endogenous domestic political corruption perspective is adopted, as political governance is now more controlled at home. From this theory, Ikejaku agrees that no government can hold stability and peace when it is created on a sea of poverty. Thus, as long as absolute poverty, which is rooted on political corruption, remains in Africa, conflict is inevitable. Political corruption have a negative impact on investment. By destroying the rule of law and weakening the institutional foundation of economic growth, corruption is the single greatest obstacle to economic and social development. The causal link between conflict, poverty, and development is that political corruption has a deleterious and aggravating effect on poverty in most African countries, which leads to an increase in conflicts, which in turn leads to the stunting of development.
When evaluating institutional capabilities, Esteban and Ray have identified four main capabilities used to set the rules of the game of how society should run. First, how they reinvest and handle their finances as the extractive capacity, as Botswana did, for example, in reinvesting their financial resources from the diamond mining back into the country. Secondly, how they follow through with economic development goals as their steering capacity, followed by the ability to find consensus with the general public through the legitimation capacity, and lastly, how authority can be respected and, if threatened, to what extent punishment or force can be imposed through the coercive capacity. Switzerland's population is very responsive and sensitive to authority. However, weakened states do not fully meet all capabilities mentioned, if any, for various historical reasons. Despite higher resource extractive and monetizing capacity today, weaker states are regressing continuously, which confirms that the political or institutional stability is a prerequisite to neutralize conflict to consequently envisage any form of sustained economic growth.
Despite the previously mentioned institutional capabilities to maintain conflict, one might wonder why peace cannot be kept in Africa. In Azam's paper, Reflections on Africa's Wars, the first reason is institutional weaknesses. The paper argued that a credible institutional framework is necessary for economic and political development. The lack of that can lead to missed development opportunities. One example is Chad, where a sizable oil reserve was discovered in 1974 but was only exploited nearly 30 years after. The second reason is related to low military power. Military power is a key element for governmental deterrence. According to the author, peace is built on the threat of war. They face an equilibrium between deterrence and the redistribution of resources. This trade-off between deterrence and redistributions is crucial to maintain peace. Moreover, war will be triggered if the government is not able to provide a peaceful and prosperous environment after minimizing the cost of buying peace. Rebels would have a low opportunity cost of fighting, and the expected returns from war may be greater than keeping peace. This might be prevented by efficient redistribution from governments to rebels. However, weak institutions lack the efficiency to do so. In the end, to maintain long-term peace, according to Azam, the balance of forces behind political institutions plays a key role in making peace durable. One example given by the author is Chad came out of 3 decades of civil war and has successfully maintained nearly 2 decades of long-term peace because the government offered a credible power-sharing agreement to the rebels' leader. This example proves that a balance of forces behind the institutional agreement makes peace durable.
Without a stable environment and proper allocation of resources, conflicts are rationalized, and a rising contestable income may increase violence by raising gains from appropriation, known as the rapacity effect. In the paper Contesting Resources when Seeking Conflicts in the Natural Resource Curse, Vic and Walter try to understand why resource-rich countries tend to crawl compared to resource-poor ones, and the causal mechanism behind. For that they distinguish pointy from diffuse resources. Geographically clustered resources such as oil are more likely to cause conflicts by being more easily controlled by a particular group in society, thus impacting income distribution and stability. To address this, two game theory models on rent-seeking and conflicts are developed. Economic agents have to optimize the allocation of their efforts between contest and production. Generally, this optimization is done by two tribes leaders. The expected payoff of fighting depends on the value of the resource and the contest success function, which is each tribe's probability of winning given their mutual efforts in fighting. This depends on the parameter M depicting the contested resource's level of pointiness. The larger M, the pointier the resource, and the closer the contest to a one-tribe grabs all situation. The game has two stages and is solved by backward induction. First, given the opponent's action, the tribe will determine its optimal allocation of efforts. If they both decide to fight, the game is a la Corno. Given the outcome, leaders will decide to contest or not. In the rent-seeking model, the game's dominant strategy is either coordination or conflict, depending on them. Below its critical value, for which leaders are indifferent between peace and conflict, rent-seeking decreases with pointiness. Resources diverted from output creation proxied by contest intensity is in this rather low, hence a minor opportunity cost. Some rent-seeking is always chosen to maximize income. However, above the threshold, pointier resources cause larger waste and a coordination game emerges. A contest trap is then likely to happen. Both tribes will compete, and resource wasted will surpass the value of the price, leading to further competition. In the conflict model, the opportunity cost is endogenous and the production deterioration is possible. Conflict equilibria are costlier, therefore less likely to happen, which may get better outcome than rent-seeking, limiting resource waste. The larger tribe would face higher losses, and the critical value of pointiness for which conflict is strategically dominant is reached sooner, paradoxically to the advantage of the smaller tribe. While the authors used a different approach than the literature with the general model, they seem to have omitted the simultaneity between institutions and resources. Only resource abundance is assumed to have a negative impact on institutional quality, whereas we saw that the resource curse is also endogenously impacted by imperfect institutions, not able to provide a stable environment.
Conflict, most especially in developing countries, can be driven by ethnic motives, as Huntington calls it the clash of civilizations, which have occurred throughout history and is still ongoing today. Ethnicity embodies different languages, genders, race, or religion that exist within a geographical region, perhaps due to upbringing or social conditioning. The methodology used to evaluate the relationship between ethnicity and conflict should be precise, as the different factors engulfed within ethnicity lead to different outcomes which could undermine the study. Ray and Esteban's scientific review of conflict and development provide numerous regressions on ethnicity and conflict and cross-reference them to similar studies. They found that fractionalization and polarization are pertinent ways of measuring ethnic disparity, however should be taken with precaution as it may be seen as too generic or a summary of scattered studies. Table 1 shows that ethnic or religious fractionalization are marginally significant as incidents for civil wars. Diving a bit deeper into how this was quantified, to compute polarization and fractionalization, Esteban relies on Fearon's paper, who identifies over 800 ethnic and ethno-religious groups in 138 countries. For intergroup distances, they employ linguistic distances between two groups as a proxy for group cultural distances, which is obviously imperfect, but at least it is more precise and could yield more conclusive results. Ethnicity turns out to be significantly correlated to conflict, in sharp contrast to the findings of previous studies. Throughout, polarization and fractionalization are highly significant and positively related to conflict by using strong p-values, which is relatable to real-life situations as we have seen across Africa, more precisely in the Rwandan crisis.
Now to the conclusion. One key finding is that markets and social interactions continue even during the absence of the state institutions, which means that the economic activities such as farming, trading, and schooling continue even during conflicts, but they become informal and illegal activities emerge. Weak institutions are a key factor at explaining conflicts more than poverty. As they become weaker, armed political actors install their governance. The economy has yet to be reconstructed after the structural changes induced during war, using technologies and innovations to build a better post-war economy which enhances peace. It is worth noting that political institutions can aggravate ethnic divisions further if they are weakened from corruption or if leaders represent a certain ethnic division. Also, to what extent are there disparities between education and healthcare within ethnic groups? Without mentioning the importance of property rights among ethnic divisions and other unlisted factors. International third parties also play an important role by providing external aid, but with limitations. For instance, health projects might be beneficial, but education intervention could be a source of additional conflicts, since they're seen as an imposition of Western values. Non-neutral armed intervention then creates more tensions and polarizations. Thank you.